Earlier on today, I was very fortunate to be joined by Immigration Minister, Mr. Robert Jenrick. Here's our conversation. Robert, thank you so much for coming in to speak to me about the small boats issue. The worry everybody has, put by the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's questions today, is that lefty lawyers will stop it. How can we be sure that that won't happen?
Well, firstly, I'm honoured to be on your show, and congratulations.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and I are absolutely determined to pilot this bill through Parliament as swiftly as we can, and then to operationalise it so it has the deterrent effect that we need. The public want to see us stopping the boats, securing our borders. We've worked very hard to make this bill as legally sound as we possibly can, whilst remaining within our international law obligations. And so I hope that the courts will respect that and will respect Parliament's view if and when it passes this law. On a number of fronts, we've sought to stop individuals who should not be in this country from making spurious human rights and other claims. So, for example, if you've come here illegally, there will only be one simple ground on which you could appeal whilst you're here in the UK, and that is if you can say that there is serious and irreversible harm of you being removed either back home to your own country or to Rwanda. Every other appeal or claim that you might wish to make will have to be done when you're in Rwanda. And so things like that have been put into the bill to try to eliminate all of the avenues that there are today for legal challenge that frustrate and gum up our system.
And we have power over our own courts, that the High Court of Parliament is the supreme authority in law. But we don't have power over the European Court of Justice. Now, the bill itself has made an Article 19 1b declaration. That is to say that the government isn't certain it meets human rights, European Convention of Human Rights requirements. Our courts will be bound by that. What about the European Court of Human Rights? How do we deal with that? Do we just ignore it if it rules against us?
Well, firstly, we believe there are very strong legal arguments behind this bill. We wouldn't be pursuing it if we didn't think that we could win in our domestic courts and that it isn't in compliance with our international law obligations. You're right to say that we've made this statement on the face of the bill, which isn't improper or even particularly unusual. It has been used in the past, both by your old friend Nick Clegg when he pursued House of Lords reform, and by Tessa Jowell when the new Labour government pursued a bill on communications. And what it means is that we don't think that it's met the very high bar of compliance with international law, but we still think there are very strong grounds, and some of the legal arguments that lie behind this legislation are new. They're novel and creative because this is a new crisis, and you'd expect the government to be coming forward with new legal solutions to it, and ones which might be tested in the court. But of course we'll respond robustly to that and defend ourselves, and you're right to say that we would expect the courts to take account of Parliament's view. And if Parliament votes for this bill, it will be giving the government the power to resolve a very serious emergency situation that requires, quite clearly, new, innovative and robust solutions. We don't anticipate that there will be a problem with the Strasbourg courts, but I certainly share your frustration at what happened last year when Priti Patel, the then Home Secretary, began to use the Rwanda policy, and it was frustrated at the 11th hour by an unnamed judge from which country we don't even know.
But thought to be a Russian in a bar.
It could have been.
You can't say that.
And I think perhaps most importantly, that was essentially an injunction which the domestic courts here in the UK had chosen not to do. And that was very unfortunate. I hope we won't see that again.
So will we refuse an injunction if a similar step were taken by the European Court? Because other European countries don't accept the validity of those injunctions.
Well, we have begun discussions with the court to share our frustration of what happened previously. and to see whether there is a more sensible way in which this could be handled so that you don't have 11th hour interventions and then potentially long legal delays when our domestic courts haven't done that. And you may note, because you're an eagle-eyed parliamentarian, that we have put a clause into the bill which asks this exact question, which is how would the government respond to what's called Rule 39 interventions by the court, which is when they try to step in at the last minute and injunct actions by the government. And we're considering how we should respond to that. But what we would like to do is have a sensible way forward where this is handled by our domestic courts here in the UK, who I hope will take careful note of what Parliament has got to say.
Well, our domestic courts must take note. They don't have any choice, and if they were to go off, that would be unconstitutional. Assuming it all works legally, can you actually get the people on the planes? Because the record of deportations by this government and previous governments is not great, and you've had passengers on flights protect the person being deported, you've had protest groups coming out, and recently somebody who went on to commit a murder was not deported because of these protests. What is it, 21 were actually deported under the bill we passed last year. How do we get those numbers up into the thousands and really make sure that happens?
Well, I share your frustration at the current situation. As the immigration minister, I see this every day. In fact, in January, I went to one of our immigration removal centres on the night that we were doing a flight to Rwanda, and literally as individuals, about foreign national offenders, were being taken to the coach, to the plane. I saw them field calls with their lawyers and put in new claims that they were now slaves who had been subjected to human trafficking that, you know, that mysteriously they'd never chosen to raise in the past. And that is abuse. Let's be honest, that is abuse of our generosity and of our laws, and we need to stamp that out. What we try to do with this bill is create a very simple and clear scheme, which is that if you arrive here illegally, you will have no right to remain here, to get citizenship or settlement or claim refugee status, and you will be removed either to your home country or to a safe country like Rwanda. And as I said earlier, the only claim that you could put in whilst you're in the UK is that there would be serious and irreversible harm if we were to put you on that plane to a country like Rwanda. And that is an extremely high bar, by which we mean physical harm primarily to the individual. And I hope that that's a bar that the courts would use very, very judiciously. So in the overwhelming majority of cases, they would turn down those claims and enable us to remove that individual.
So no last-minute injunctions as people are getting on the steps of the plane, no last-minute injunctions from the European Court, Parliament asserting its sovereignty, something that couldn't happen if we were still in the European Union.
That's right. And, you know, I think this, if we can achieve the scheme that we've set out today, then this will be something that other countries will look to follow. We're not an outlier. I think we will be the first country with more to follow, because other developed countries in Europe and elsewhere are facing the same global migration challenge. They want to preserve their borders, they believe in national sovereignty, and they need to think of creative solutions like the one that we've set out here. Otherwise, then I'm afraid we are going to be subjected not just to 45,000 people crossing the Channel as we did last year, but to tens of thousands more, maybe even hundreds of thousands, because there are at least 100 million people in the world today, as the Home Secretary said in Parliament, which in fact was a UN statistic. 100 million people on the move, looking to move to developed economies, attractive places like the United Kingdom.
Well, Robert, thanks so much for being the first minister to come on my programme. I'm extremely grateful and for answering all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks.